Leary.
What is going on? Matt O'Leary and Anthony Rivardo back for another episode of Big Apple Blitz. Anthony, how are you this morning?
Doing great, man. I'm excited to talk about the Stefon Diggs trade, react to that in this episode, and not too much going on with the New York Giants, but Joe Shane, GM, had an interesting quote, and there was an interesting mock draft, so excited to kind of dive into everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like usually in most cases, the time between like the initial first wave or two of free agency and the draft usually gets a little bit quiet, but that really hasn't been the case so far. And, yesterday, another really good example of that as the Buffalo Bills trade Stefon Diggs. And while technically not about either the Jets or the Giants in terms of, being involved in the trade, has a major impact on the New York Jets and the landscape of the AFC East. So from my thoughts or perspective on this, I think the Bills sold very low on Stefon Diggs. The return that they got from the Houston Texans was shocking how little in return they got. The main piece, the second round pick in 2025 for Diggs. And you look at that wide receiver room, I think obviously they're going to be a team that's going to look to add one in the NFL draft, but you lose your top two receivers in Diggs and Gabe Davis. And I don't know, that team looks like they've taken a step back to me, at least on paper.
I would agree with you there. I think that this offense is now setting up to be Josh Allen versus everybody. The receiving core just is not looking up to snub with some of these other top teams in the league. And if you compare it to what they had last year, losing Diggs, losing Davis, huge blows to that offense. But I was reading some of those stats about Joe Brady, their new offensive coordinator, and how apparently he doesn't like to maximize one specific receiver. And that's probably led to the Bills making these decisions to move on from these players. I thought that was interesting. And we'll see what it means for Josh Allen, what it means for the Bills. The AFC East, though, in my opinion, after this deal, is really the New York Jets to lose.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like to try to stay as pragmatic as possible when talking about the Jets and try to, take bias out of it. But do the Jets not have a really good shot at this division? I think on paper, for sure, the Jets and the Dolphins both have a better roster at this point than the Buffalo Bills. Now, granted, Josh Allen is so good that, he could keep them in contention as an elite level quarterback, but things feel like it's shaking out to where the Jets should have a legitimate chance at this division. And honestly, I don't think it's crazy if you want to go out and pick the Jets to win the AFC East. I know last year, you lose Rodgers, a million injuries, but we've talked up the offseason. They've had a really good offseason. They continue to build out the roster. They have, a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. We'll see who they add there. But then the two teams that finished ahead of you last year, and the Bills and Dolphins, I think you can make a case they got worse, both teams in the offseason.
I would agree with that. And meanwhile, the Jets got significantly better in my eyes. I think that this team is much better on paper than it was at the end of last season. So when you look at it from that way, I think you have to say, listen, the Jets don't have many excuses this year. I mean, injuries might hold them back. We'll see how Rodgers plays coming off of the torn Achilles. We'll see if all these other guys that they signed and that they've been developing stay healthy. That's really going to be the key here. But on paper, I keep saying it on this show, as a Giants fan, outside perspective, I think that the Jets have one of the best rosters in the NFL, and it's really put up or shut up. Like, this is their time to win that division, and if they don't win it now, then when? Because this really is a prime opportunity for them. But on the Stefon Diggs trade, one other thing that I'll say, the 2025 second-round pick surprised me. I thought that it would be some compensation from this year's class. It's for next year's class, which almost makes me wonder, man, why didn't the Giants consider doing this? Like maybe the Giants should have gotten involved here, brought Stefon Diggs back with Brian Dable, given whether you're thinking Daniel Jones or any other quarterback in this class, of the rookies, to pair up with Stefon Diggs for the foreseeable future. It would have been a great move. It's one that we talked about even where we said maybe we wait until training camp and the Giants trade 2025 draft capital for a bona fide WR1. They could have done that right here with Stefon Diggs. So I'm wondering, why didn't the Giants maybe pick up the phone or make a phone call and check in on Stefon?
Yeah, and that's one that I think any team would be glad to get a receiver of Stefon Diggs' caliber at that cost. You know, he's been really good over the last 4 years in Buffalo. Four-time Pro Bowler. He was an All-Pro in his first season there. And in what was a down year for him, he still finished with nearly 1,200 yards, like 8 touchdowns, over 100 catches. And I get it. In the second half of the year when they made the switch to Joe Brady, he wasn't nearly at his elite level self, but again, like I don't know what the Bills' plan is here. You lose Davis, and good for him. He signs a massive contract in free agency. He leaves, and you move Davis, and they're eating a lot of money to move off of him too. It's not like it's freeing up a ton of cap space. To me, it feels like they were just done with this guy, and maybe something behind the scenes just was not working there. It feels like there was always kind of rumblings with Diggs there the last couple of years. I believe, you know, they didn't know where he was at the start of a training camp. And it's just, I don't know, but even if you add, let's say they're in the range to take someone like a AD Mitchell out of Texas, or one of these late receivers in round one, is it fair to expect them to come in and produce at the level that Diggs did for them? I don't think that's going to be the case.
I don't either. And now it obviously looks like this team is going to go wide receiver in the first round. And yeah, there's tremendous talents on the board who should be available because it's such a deep wide receiver class. But you make a great point there. I don't think that these receivers step into the NFL immediately making that impact unless you're talking about one of these Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, Malik Neighbors in the top 10 picks. But if the Bills are picking, what is it? I believe 28th, somewhere around there. If they go ahead and take Adonai Mitchell, are you really expecting him to go for 1,000 receiving yards as a rookie? Maybe not. Maybe he does. I mean, he is a tremendous talent, but I don't think he ever went for 1,000 receiving yards during his collegiate career. If correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. He had a lack of production. The tools and traits are there. He needs to go into the right situation. And right now, I don't know. The Buffalo Bills are the situation that's going to maximize a rookie receiver, considering the question marks with their offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, and how they run their offense. So I think that this argument we can make for the Bills, we can make this for the Giants as well, as we talk about them potentially going quarterback in the first round or receiver in the first round. If they take Malik Neighbors with the number 6 pick, I would bank on him going for 1,000 receiving yards just because the Giants offense is that bad that he would probably get force fed the ball a ton. But you also have to keep in mind, because the offense is so bad, he might not get the ball as much as he wants to, and he might not reach those expectations. And then if they go quarterback in the first round, second round receiver, it's even less likely that they have that kind of an impact and go for that 1,000 receiving yard mile marker. So it's interesting to see kind of how this shapes the landscape, of course, of the AFC East, but also the NFL draft. It puts certain things into perspective and reminds you that there are players, there are wide receivers who are available for trade every offseason. And if the Giants don't end up going with a receiver in the first round and they do go quarterback in the first round, there will be some sort of opportunity this year, next year. They could still land a WR1 bona fide player in the NFL already established. So they don't necessarily need to take the top playmaker with that number 6 pick. I think that this is kind of a way to open up the conversation to say the Giants could feel comfortable going quarterback in the first round because they know that there will be wide receivers available on the trade market.
No, absolutely. And you're right. AD Mitchell, best year was this past year at Texas, 845 yards, 11 touchdowns in 14 games. So hasn't reached 1,000 yards. That's not to say that he can't come into the league and do that. I think he's a talented player, and wherever he goes, you know, whatever team drafts him is going to get a really nice player there. But, you know, it's asking a lot. And for, you know, Buffalo, I think they're going to pivot their offense a little bit and really go with the heavy 2 tight ends. Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, I think, are going to be the main passing targets. James Cook has come on nicely for them, and Allen's going to have to go back to playing a little bit of hero ball, I think, in order for them to have success. But you're right. Like this trade just goes to show you how often we see wide receivers on the move. So for the Giants, they could absolutely, you never know, maybe even after the draft, someone ends up getting moved. You know, Brandon Ayuk is a name we've brought up a ton because, you know, there's rumblings of contract negotiations not going great there. He's going into the final year of his rookie contract on the 5th-year option. Maybe he's someone who gets traded during the week of the draft or maybe even after the draft. You never know with these things. So it's going to be important from the Giant side of things to keep an eye on that. But it just goes to show you, like, sometimes these deals come out of nowhere. No one was talking about Diggs getting traded, a few weeks before that gets moved. Tyreek Hill gets traded, and no one knew that Tyreek Hill was going to get traded until that day when it was like the Jets. He's either going to the Jets or the Dolphins, and he ends up in Miami. So sometimes you kind of just got to keep an ear out, and these deals will just present themselves. But you're right to bring that up with the Giants and the quarterback, because it's significantly harder to find a quarterback on the trade market than it is a wide receiver one, because there's many examples, even in recent years, of wide receivers getting moved, and not for very costly amounts. As we said, a 2025 second round pick, I think you'd pull the trigger on that instantly if a similar deal comes up.
Yeah, definitely you do. If you're the Giants, I mean, like we said, if they get to training camp and Brandon Ayuk is still holding out with the 49ers, I think that's when you call the 49ers and just say, here's our 2025 second round pick. So the compensation would be similar to Stefon Diggs, and you're getting Ayuk, who's coming off of 1,500 yards. But you are right in the sense that trading for a quarterback in the future, if the Giants were to go this route, go wide receiver at number 6, and then say, hey, we'll find the quarterback next offseason, those trades are not as common, and they're also far more expensive. They do happen. Matt Stafford, that trade happened, but look at how costly that one was. How about Aaron Rodgers, how costly that trade was? These are really expensive trades for usually aging veteran quarterbacks going into win now situations. The Giants are not going to be a win now team in 2025, so they're not even going to be positioned to trade significant draft capital for a veteran quarterback going into a win now situation. So to me, I always go back to that, and I've kind of gone back and forth with that on Fireside Giants as well. And we've discussed, could they find a quarterback next year? Well, you don't know what the draft class is going to look like. I know we always hear it's projected not to be a great class, but at this time in the pre-draft process for the following draft, Joe Burrow was probably a 5th-round pick and ended up being the number 1 overall pick after a historic Heisman winning campaign for LSU. So you have to keep that in mind. You don't know what the draft class looks like. So the Giants could go that route and play it a little bit riskier and say, hey, maybe next year we'll trade for somebody, or we'll land the quarterback. Or you go the route of, we are finally sitting here in the top 6 with an opportunity to draft a top quarterback. We got to take advantage. And I think, this is supposed to be more AFC East landscape conversation, but it really does open up Pandora's box here and make you look around the league at the situation, trades for receivers, trades for quarterbacks, and really puts into kind of perspective for me, for the New York Giants, picking in the top 6 with these wide receivers being traded all over the league. You got to take advantage of a top 10 draft pick and take a quarterback.
No, absolutely. And that's probably a good transition into what we wanted to get into next, which was a mock draft that has the New York Giants trading up for Drake Maye. So Lance Zierlein puts out his mock draft. In the most recent mock, he has the Giants trading up to pick number 3 with the New England Patriots and drafting Drake Maye. I know you're a big Drake Maye fan, but how excited would you be for that on draft night?
I mean, I would be absolutely thrilled. Like, Drake Maye is a quarterback that I think just has such a tremendous ceiling in the NFL. You want to talk about what we were just talking about with the Buffalo Bills, a guy who likes to play hero ball and has a strong arm, Josh Allen. I see a lot of that in Drake Maye's game. And when you look at the Bills, Brian Dable developed Josh Allen. It took him a little while. I think a lot of fans do forget that it's not like Josh Allen entered the NFL as a good player. He was pretty bad his first couple seasons. It wasn't really until year 3 that it clicked for him and Dable, and he became a solid starting quarterback, a really good one at that. That might be the same case for Drake Maye, but who else do you trust to develop that kind of talent than the guy who's done it before with Brian Dable? So Drake Maye to the New York Giants is like a dream match to me. I just think skill set wise, coaching staff wise, it's a perfect match. So if that were to be the case, I would be over the moon if the Giants ended up landing Drake Maye. But he doesn't include Lance Zierlein in this mock draft, doesn't include what the trade compensation would be to get to number 3, which is notable because he mentions that it would be more expensive than usual because of the player that they're getting. But again, doesn't mention what exactly it would be. So would the Giants be giving up that 2nd round pick at number 47 overall? Would they be giving up a future first? I'm not 100% sure. But moving up to get that quarterback, it sucks that the Giants are at 6 and not at 3, and they can't just land the quarterback in their laps. But moving up to 3, it's going to be costly. However, my humble opinion is Drake Maye is worth the move up to go ahead and draft him. And the Giants, again, need to take advantage of being in this top 6 position and go ahead and get their guy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I would totally do it. I think it's worth it. I wanted to pull up the not that it's a 1-for-1, but it's a good reference. The Draft Tech value chart has the 6 pick at 1,600 and New England's pick at 2,200. So it's going to cost you a lot to move. If you're just using this year's capital, the second rounder and third rounder this year, but I would think it's probably maybe a second rounder this year, second rounder next year, kind of a thing to get up that high.
Yeah, and so that's kind of opened up debate for Giants fans is, can you do this trade and keep that second round pick, that number 47 overall pick? Would you maybe swap that out for the 2025 first round pick? And that's the big question mark. And I've made this argument that if I were Joe Shane and I were the New York Giants, I would be sitting here saying, hey, my back is against the wall. I need results this season. If I don't get results this season, I'm probably not going to have a job next season with the New York Giants. So if I were Joe Shane, I would say, hey, we want to keep this number 47 overall pick. We will probably use it to draft a wide receiver to pair with our quarterback, but we will give you our future first round pick because we don't even know if we're going to be here to use it unless we land 2 solid players in the first round and second round to get some wins this upcoming season. So that's the way that I would play it if I were Joe Shane and the Giants. And I think that the Patriots, looking to make a more long-term full-scale rebuild, might be enticed by that, a future first round pick to move down 3 spots and still land Malik Neighbors probably, or maybe even Marvin Harrison Jr., depending on how the draft board falls. I think that the Patriots would be all in on that and probably would value that future first round pick, but maybe that's because I'm biased and I'm hopeful here, and I'm hoping that they would prefer that because I would rather give up that future first than the number 47 pick.
Yeah, I think, for them, this is not for New England. It's not going to be a quick rebuild. It's not like, hey, we're going to retool on the fly in this year's draft and be ready to compete in 2024. Not really the case. They could use more talent on that roster. So sliding back, getting a first round pick next year. I guess my question to you would be, if you draft Drake Maye, how much does that raise the ceiling of this team for this year? I guess it would, in comparison to, starting a Daniel Jones or, Drew Lock, but giving the risk of giving up that future first round pick, not that they would be like the Carolina Panthers and gift wrap the number 1 overall pick, but would you be concerned if that's like, if it ends up being a top 15 pick in next year's draft?
I wouldn't be concerned because that's just kind of the risk you're willing to take for a quarterback, and that's what you're preparing for. I don't think that the Giants are going to be picking outside of the top 15 next year necessarily. Like, I think that there's a good chance that they end up being a bad football team and have a top 15 pick. So while it's difficult to sacrifice that, you take that sacrifice knowing like, hey, we have our quarterback of the future. And this isn't uncharted territory for the Giants. Back in 2004, they held the 4th overall pick. The Chargers had the 1st overall pick. The Giants wanted Eli Manning. Eli Manning wanted out of San Diego. They made it work. They gave up a future first round pick. And I believe that they won around 6 games that season. So they probably gave up a future top 20 pick, I believe, top 15 pick. So we've seen the Giants do this before. We'll see them do it again, I hope. I think that Drake Maye is one of those players that you do it for. You give up all that draft capital and you hopefully build around him, knowing that his prototype build, his archetype of quarterback is exactly what Brian Daboll looks for and is exactly what Brian Daboll has made a name for himself developing into stardom with the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. So that's the way that I would conceptualize it. And that's why if the Giants do decide to make this trade, whatever they give up, it might be steep and it might sting because we might lose out on a lot of prospects in the future. And even on day 2 of the draft, if they do give up a second round pick or maybe a third round pick, that will sting. But you have to know that if you hit on the quarterback position and if this player pans out, all those other picks that you gave up, I mean, they're going to be, who cares? Because you've got the franchise quarterback to build your team around.
Yeah, I mean, from going back to that Giants trade, it ended up being the 12th overall pick in 2005, and the Giants went 6-10 in 2004, but then in 2005, 11-5 and win the division. So exactly. I think you would sign up for potentially giving up a top 12 pick if it means you're winning 11 games in the NFC East in 2025. I think anybody would sign up for that.
Right. And they wouldn't have done that without Eli Manning. Had they not made that trade, they wouldn't have been able to find that success. And especially if you want to go a couple of years later and get to that Super Bowl that he ended up winning for them in 2007-8 season against the New England Patriots, wouldn't have happened if they didn't have Eli Manning. And I know that going into that season was really a prove it year because Eli Manning hadn't fully established himself as being a star just yet going into that Super Bowl run. But he was getting there and he was developing. The team was getting better around him. He was elevating talent. Ultimately, that's what you're hoping for if you make a trade again this year. If you get a quarterback, no, he's probably not going to turn into CJ Stroud from year one. But again, Josh Allen, it took him a few years and then he developed into a star. If you do something similar there, you draft Drake Maye, you give him a few seasons. Again, I think that this is a way for Brian Dable and Joe Shane to extend their leash and their shelf
Yep.
time with the New York Giants as well. So I think they have added motivation to go ahead and draft a quarterback. There's a lot of factors that go into it that just tell you this is the move that the New York Giants need to make. It may not be the one that's possible to make, though, and that's something that they also need to prepare for. What if there are no trade partners who want to move down only a couple spots? What if all of them are just interested in moving down with the Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, because they know they can get more future draft capital out of those guys? It's totally possible that those teams are willing to move that far down the board. But if they're not, the Giants are sitting right there at 6. Whoever moves down with them still has a chance at a blue chip wide receiver or an offensive tackle potentially. So I think that the Giants are an ideal trading down candidate for both the Cardinals and the Patriots. And in this mock draft, trading up with the Patriots, they land Drake Maye. Again, I'd be over the moon. And I think that this is exactly what the New York Giants should be aiming to do on draft night.
Yeah, and something we've talked about even on this show is just how much past relationships really impact draft day trades. And Brian Dable has a good relationship with New England. And I know there's been some turnover there recently, but those relationships matter. And, Joe Shane and Brian Dable teaming up to move up in this draft, I think they do need to be aggressive because, like you said, it's so much easier for them to move on from the Giant side of things, to move on from both those guys if there's no quarterback attached to them. If they don't draft a guy this year and things go poorly, do you maybe just bring in a new GM and a new coach and then they draft their guy in 2025 and then the GM, coach, and quarterback are all on the same timeline from there? So you're right. I think it buys them a little bit more time. And for someone of Drake Maye's caliber, I like him more than I like JJ McCarthy. So I would be willing to give up the extra capital to get up to 3 in order to get him over moving up just a couple spots with Arizona. But I think, I don't know how likely it is because the Pats really need a quarterback too, and maybe they just stay there and pick. But if this is an option, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and it's contingent on whether or not it's an option for sure, right? Because we're talking about Drake Maye, and this is the quarterback that I want for the Giants. I think he fits perfectly with this team, this coaching staff, everything. But you do have to keep in mind there's a chance he goes number 2 to Washington, lands in the laps of a division rival. Then what? Are we willing to trade up to 3 for Jaden Daniels? Are we willing to trade to 4 for JJ McCarthy? I'm not so sure. I'm a little bit less high on those guys and a little bit more like I'll just stick and pick and see if they land in my lap at number 6 for both of those guys. Maybe I would argue, I think I have in the past, trading up to 4 for McCarthy, depending on the trade package, but there would be a price ceiling for me on both of those guys, Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy, whereas the ceiling's much higher for Drake Maye. I'd be willing to trade a lot more for Maye than I would those other 2 prospects. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens on draft night. I don't think that we're going to know who's getting traded where. I think that the Giants, if they do trade into the top 3, it's not happening until the night of the draft. I think they're going to wait to see who the number 2 overall pick is and then try to make that move up, which obviously creates tension and makes it difficult to get those deals done in such a time efficient manner with those teams on the board. But we'll see if it happens. Ultimately, I just pray to God that Drake Maye doesn't go number 2 to the Washington Commanders. I want him to be available at number 3 so the Giants can maybe sneak their way into that deal and hopefully land him in Big Blue.
Yeah, and for the last little bit, it seemed like that Drake Maye wouldn't be the pick for Washington for whatever reason, that they prefer Jane Daniels. Now, I always kind of like to, at this time of year, to take a look at like the draft odds and see what the odds makers have for the number 2 pick. And they have still Daniels as the favorite, but you have Maye rising up and he's not at plus money anymore. I think he's like minus 105 and then it was like minus 125, something like that for Jaden Daniels. So you're not getting great value on either one of those guys, but it feels like they're saying, the odds makers are saying that it could be either one of those 2 guys now, where, a week or so ago, that wasn't the case. It felt like in every single mock, it was Daniels is going at 2 because Washington likes him more, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore.
Yeah, and then you got to keep in mind a couple of weeks ago we heard Tom Pelissero, maybe that was even last week, said JJ McCarthy is going to be the guy at number
Mhm.
2. So who really knows? I mean, that's the beauty of the NFL draft. That's what makes it so exciting. We don't really know what's going to happen, but that also makes things difficult for a team like the Giants who maybe do want to move up to 3. It's going to have to wait until draft night, I think. Like we've seen trades happen weeks in advance. We've seen the Jets, I believe that trade happened a couple of weeks before the NFL draft when they moved up for Sam Darnold in 2018. The Giants probably aren't in a position to do that. I don't think that they're moving up to the number 3 overall pick here until the night of the draft when they see who's available and on the draft board. That's probably when it gets done. If it gets done, and even then, maybe the Patriots say, hey, we want a quarterback. We're sticking and picking. We're not even picking up the phone. That's also possible. So we'll see how it shapes out. But I definitely have my preferences on the quarterbacks. I think the Giants do too. Connor Hughes covers the Giants and the Jets for SNY. He has said that Drake May is the Giants' preference. And we've heard other reporters say it's JJ McCarthy. So I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think even Benjamin Albright recently said that it's Jaden Daniels is their preference. So who knows? It's all over the place, but that's why I just can't wait. We're 21 days away, NFL draft, 3 Thursdays from now, and I'm just ready for the madness to come to an end.
Absolutely. At this point, it's pick a name out of a hat, but we will see in just 3 weeks' time. The next thing I wanted to get into was it looks like the Philadelphia Eagles kind of throwing some shade Hassan Reddick's way after he walks out the door. I wanted to pull up a tweet that Philadelphia Eagles Central had where people inside the Eagles organization suspected Hassan Reddick of chasing sacks last season to potentially receive a larger contract per Jeff McClain on 97.5 The Fanatic. Reddick led all Eagles pass rushers in sacks in both of the last 2 seasons. Now, for me on this one, I don't see this as an issue. Like I know what they're trying to say is like maybe he's doing a little bit of freelancing on plays, but like Reddick isn't someone who you're going to use as a edge setter or a gap setting edge rusher. Like he's top 5 in sacks in the NFL over the last 5 years. He's someone who you kind of just go, all right, like we're going to let you loose. Everyone else kind of has their role, and that's fine. But I don't look at it as a bad thing that Reddick is just going like sack crazy because that's his strength. You want a guy like Hassan Reddick to go in there and use his speed and use his, pass rushing prowess to your advantage because you want him closing out games for you.
Yeah, and what I'll say is that the guy had 67 total pressures this past season. I think that if he was chasing just sacks and he was maybe getting a lot of cleanup sacks, the number of pressures would be in the 40s and the sack total would still be as high, which I think that you can make this argument if you want to look at a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau, his stat line. I think he had 40 total pressures and 11 and a half sacks, whatever it was. Now that's a little bit of a disparity, right? Like that's a difference between 67 total pressures and however many sacks Hassan Reddick had. I know obviously it was in the double digits and it was among the top in the NFL. This is not a guy who I think is just chasing sacks. And for what it's worth, if you want to go by PFF metrics, his 64 overall run defense grade is above average. So it's not like he's just taking plays off and only going for opportunities that he sees a sack. He's been ultimately one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL over the past 2 years in terms of his pass rushing productivity and his total in pressures. So I think you can point to that and say he's not just chasing cleanup sacks. He's actually making an impact on a down-to-down basis.
Yeah, he had 11. It was 11 sacks last year, but you're right. Like the 67 pressures, he's over. If you look at the last 5 seasons, he's again fifth in the league. So he's very consistent with it. To me, this kind of feels like kicking the guy when he's on his way out. And I think it's clear that negotiations didn't go well with Philadelphia. They bring in Bryce Huff, a younger guy who they feel can take the next step in his career and replace the production that Hassan Reddick gave them over the last couple of seasons. But this seems a little bit common from the Eagles organization. They spoke out against Chip Kelly. There was some comments from Howie Roseman on Carson Wentz after they move on from him. So my interpretation was it was more of that than something that the Jets should actually be worried about like happening for them. And obviously you've seen a lot of Hassan Reddick over the last 2 seasons as he plays against the Giants twice a year. That's not something you're really worried about, right? Like him coming over and, like I said, kind of freelancing it.
No, I don't think so at all. And even pulling up Pro Football Focus right here, I found one of their advanced analytics, their PRP. It's a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times they rush the passer. Of course, at the top of this, you did have Bryce Huff was number 2 in the NFL at 12.2. Micah Parsons number 1, 12.6 for reference. But at 50, you had Hassan Reddick at 7.2, which is a pretty good number. You know, when you're looking at Brandon Graham is at 44 at 7.7. Why don't you make the same argument for him? Is it because he's still on the Philadelphia Eagles? This is just classic Philadelphia. I think that the Eagles fan base is my least favorite thing on the planet. I hate the Eagles. I hate their fans. I think that they're just not good people and not fun to talk to and interact and talk about the sport with. Hassan Reddick, you could find the stats and you can compare him to other players in that cluster of sack ranges and pressure ranges. He is not taking plays off. He is not only freelancing the sacks, like you mentioned. He is down to down productive. It's according to the advanced analytics. Whoever made that report or let that get out of the building clearly just wanted to kick him on his way out, like you said, and just throw some shade at him. There's really no basis to it if you look at the stats. And the stats do speak more than just one disgruntled Philadelphia Eagles employee trying to smear some guy's name on his way out of the building.
Yeah, and I don't know, just looking at Reddick, I mean, we could debate about whether long-term, 3 years from now, if Reddick is still going to be a better player than Bryce Huff. But for the immediate and looking at 2024, I think Reddick's going to be really good for this team. We talked about him in the episode on Monday reacting to the trade, but he's not going to have to deal with a ton of double teams because of the rest of that defensive line. You have Quinn Williams on the interior. On the other side, you could have, either John Franklin Myers or Jermaine Johnson, who had a really nice second year, or Will McDonald's, who's going into his second year and expected to have a little bit more of a role in pass rushing situations. So I think he has a chance to continue to be really productive for this Jets team in 2024. And, the conditions on that pick in 2026, turning from a third rounder into a second rounder, is snap percentage and sacks, and he has to get over 10 sacks and play more than 67.5%. I have no doubt in my mind he's going to be a 10 plus sack season, if assuming health. If he plays, if he gets hurt, then maybe he doesn't hit that, but if he's playing all 17 games, he's probably going to be around 12 sacks again, like he normally is every year in his career.
Yeah, and then I'll even find or share. I found one more stat to really back this up and talk in favor of Hassan Reddick here. And I think this is a really good one. If you're looking at true pass sets, which are plays where there's no play action, it's just one-on-one pass rushing opportunities for the pass rushers. Hassan Reddick had a win percentage of 19.6 on true passing sets, which is the exact same as Max Crosby of the Las Vegas Raiders, who's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So there you go. I think that tells you everything you need to know about. He's just winning his pass rushing stats. He's not taking plays off. He's not getting cleanup sacks. He's on a down-to-down basis, winning his pass rushing opportunities and getting after the quarterback. So again, we've talked about it. I think he's a player that the Jets fans and the Jets should be really excited about having. I think he really adds something to this defense that on paper has a lot of talent. But like you just said, it's about health with this team, with Reddick, with all of these players, with Tyron Smith, if you want to go to the left tackle spot, all over the place. It's really health, but the talent is absolutely there. Hassan Reddick has been one of the more productive pass rushers in the NFL for the last several years. I don't expect that to change. I think he'll still be productive. And I think, again, any Eagles fan just kind of dissing him on his way out, that's all that it is. You can look optically at it and compare these stats to Bryce Huff versus Hassan Reddick, and of course go through that debate and talk about, did the Jets make the right decision? But at the end of the day, here they are. It's cheaper to have Hassan Reddick, and they're going to move forward with the veteran there, and they're in that win now opportunity anyway. So if Hassan Reddick can continue to be productive like he has been, this defense is only going to improve on paper and on the field.
Absolutely. And like I said, I just saw that one yesterday. Thought it was a head scratcher. Wanted to get our takes out there on Hassan Reddick and why we don't think it's a very big deal that report came out. But wanted to get back into the Giants and the draft. We talked about them potentially trading up for Drake Maye, but it seems like Joe Schoen has left the door open for multiple options. And with 3 weeks to go to the NFL draft, I think that's how you want it. I don't think you want it like out there, like well known what you're looking to do. I think most of the world assumes the Giants want to trade up, but leaving the door open for moving back, do you think that's likely for the Giants?
I don't know if I'd say that it's likely, but it's definitely possible. And I think it depends on the draft board. And it would really come down to personal preference for the New York Giants. Like, let's say that they don't view Malik Neighbors as highly as the rest of the consensus does, or maybe they feel that way about Roma Dunze. And whoever is available on the board, whichever receiver it is, they're just like, you know what? We don't have a huge gap between him and the guy that we're going to take at number 18 if we trade down. So let's go ahead and trade down and get the extra draft capital. I think that's the only way that it would happen. I think that the Giants are prime trade up candidate, which again, Joe Shane hinted that that's a possibility, which is really encouraging for me as we get closer to the draft season or to the draft rather. We're deep in the season. Get closer to the draft and talk about those mock trades. I have the Giants moving up for Drake Maye like we did earlier, but looking at potential trade downs, I think those are less likely. However, you could make an argument that at some point in this draft, the Giants kind of need to. And a lot of fans are going to point to the number 6 overall pick and say, man, imagine trading down with the Vikings, getting 2 first-round picks and really rebuilding this team. I'm going to point to number 47 overall. If the Giants can trade down in the second round, still land a nice talent at wide receiver, because again, it is such a loaded class that they'll probably still be able to get a good player if they trade down from 47 to maybe 57 or 60 in the second round. They could still get a really solid receiver, maybe pick up an additional 4th-round pick, and they don't have a 7th-round pick, and I know a lot of fans probably don't care about a 7th-round pick. Believe me, an NFL GM does as he tries to build out his special teams in the back end of his roster and get some more competitors in there for training camp. I think that the Giants are a prime trade down candidate in round 2, not necessarily in round 1, and I think that's something that fans should keep an eye on. And they did this a couple years ago. It was a different GM. It was Dave Gettleman. They did trade down in round 2, and I believe it was 2021. Still landed Azeez Ojulari. So that should tell you what you need to know. It doesn't tell you what you need to know about this draft class, but when Azeez Ojulari going into that draft, he was considered a potential first-round pick, somebody that the Giants were linked to with the 11th overall pick. On day 2, when the Giants were picking in the early 30s, everybody was like, okay, we're going to go ahead and land Azeez Ojulari. This is going to be sick. Then they traded down. Everybody freaked out. It was like, why would you trade down? Azeez Ojulari is on the board. They landed him with the 50th overall pick anyway. So that's what I would say look at for the New York Giants. Picking there at number 47, they could trade down to 57, still land the guy that they wanted at 47, and it could be a really nice toolsy playmaker at the wide receiver position in a later second-round pick. And then you have extra draft capital maybe later on day 2 or throughout day 3. Maybe even in 2025, you get extra draft capital. So with the Giants only having 6 draft picks, I don't think it's enough. I think this team needs depth in many different areas. Trading down in round 2 and adding a little bit of draft capital in day 3, I think that's more likely than trading down in day 1.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, because for the Giants, I think best case scenario is you're moving up for a quarterback, because if you're staying there at pick 6, I don't think one of the top 4 guys are going to be there for you. I think they either go in the top 4, or if maybe Arizona stays and takes Marvin Harrison, then the Chargers trade out and, JJ McCarthy goes there, or however the board falls. But you're either getting a star wide receiver at 6, which I'm good with, or trading up for a quarterback, which I think either one of those routes is fine. If I'm the Giants, I wouldn't move out, because I do think you need like significant talent on the offensive side of the ball. So I would just take, if the board doesn't break my way, if I can't get the trade up, I would just take the best wide receiver there. But I do like the idea of moving back in the second round and picking up additional capital. They do only have 6 picks. They had another second round pick that they used in a trade. So I'm curious to see if they do slide back a few spots. And like you said, though, there is a lot of talent in this draft. So you can afford to move back a little bit. It's not like you have to stick there at 47. It's reminiscent of it away for the Jets. It ended up not working out, but at pick in 2020, they had pick 48, and a player that the Jets fans really wanted, myself included, was Denzel Mims, someone who was a borderline first round receiver, was sitting there for the Jets at 48. And you go, oh, like, here you go, obvious pick. They trade down 11 spots, and you're thinking, oh man, you're going to miss out on Denzel Mims. He ends up falling to them at 59. They take him there. He had a good rookie season, but then never really panned out after that. But moral of this, like, you could still get the guy that you're targeting by moving back and, playing the board. Sometimes it worked for the Giants with Dave Gettleman moving back and getting, Azeez Ojulari, the guy that you wanted anyway. The Jets did it. I know it didn't technically work out with Mims, but you don't necessarily have to stick and pick. You can move down the board and still get someone that you like. And if you go wide receiver in the first round, you could probably move back because you're not necessarily looking for that next wide receiver in the second round, and you could target another position.
Right. And it hasn't necessarily worked out with Azeez Ojulari as well. That should probably be clarified. But still, the process is
Yeah.
the same as what the Jets did there with Denzel Mims. The process is you move down, add the extra draft capital, and you still probably land the guy that you want. But you make a really good point there where if the Giants get that wide receiver in round one and they're not going to take a quarterback in this draft, well, then you might as well just trade down in round two, add even more draft capital. Then you can probably target a corner. You could probably add some depth at safety, maybe add another pass rusher to this mix behind Brian Burns, Azeez Ojulari, and Kayvon Thibodeau. You get really creative. I would really love the idea of the Giants trading down round two and adding some more talent to this roster. But then you also have the possibility of what if they trade up in round two? So how about they stick and pick at 6? Maybe they land Romo Dunze. Let's throw that name out there. Now they have the 47th overall pick. Michael Penix Jr. falling down the board. Maybe they trade up into the back end of the first round with that pick and get a quarterback at the end of the first round on a rookie contract with a 5th-year option, which I think is really important. So that's another avenue that they can go. Joe Shane's saying that they're open to all options. It's good to just discuss all those options, what they could be. And I think trading down in the second round is one that's not discussed enough, but also trading up in the second round to try and land that quarterback at the end of the first, that could be a possibility as well. And one that would intrigue me, although would not have me nearly as excited as trading up with the first round pick and landing a guy like a Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, what if I'll give you a scenario. Obviously, like you just said, it's not your preferred route because you'd rather go with one of the four, and I would too. But let's say you stay at 6, you take Malik Neighbors, and then you package the second and third rounder to get back into the first round to draft. We'll say like Michael Penix at like pick 29. Would that be something that interests you?
It would be something that interests me, but I know that it would be a polarizing decision and a decisive or a divisive one because there are a lot of Giants fans who love Michael Penix and would be willing to take him at number 6. And then there's others who say he shouldn't even be on their draft board because of the injury history and they don't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. So it would be an interesting decision for the Giants to go that route. And again, I think that they're leaning towards trying to get into the top 3 anyways to draft a quarterback. But if this is the route that they take, I'm open to it and I'd be intrigued by it. I think that there's a lot to like about Michael Penix. There's a lot to not like about him as well. The injury history is definitely something that you have to point to, but there are tools, there are traits there. There are things to say and highlight that make you believe he could be a successful NFL starting quarterback. So I would like that move just because I would like the fact that they're taking that swing and they're being risky and going all in. That would be exciting for me. But there are definitely risks involved with that one. And again, it wouldn't be as exciting for me as taking that swing on a more surefire. Not that any quarterback really has ever surefire in the NFL draft, but a more sure thing in the top 3 picks than, pick 29 or whatever the example you gave was.
Yeah, it's risky and it's a little outside the box. It's not my preferred route of roster building, but who knows? Like Joe Shane said, and like we've mentioned on the show, like you got to keep all options open. And you could want to trade up all you want, but sometimes the trade's not there for you at pick number 6. So maybe they have to go a different direction at that point. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm really excited for the NFL draft now, just 3 weeks away. So we have a few more episodes to get into it. Maybe eventually I put us on the spot here, but might be fun to do some mock draft exercises controlling the Jets and Giants as we get closer as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun, especially on the day of the draft. We do these on Mondays and Thursdays. Draft is on a Thursday night. That day, we can lock in our final picks. I think that's something we should definitely have on the horizon. But diving into some more mock drafts, more rumors and speculation leading up to this draft, it's going to be really exciting. Again, it's a little bit slow with the news for the Giants. I mean, the Jets have been pretty active and doing a whole lot, so I'm a little bit jealous. And I wish the Giants were more active and maybe did land a Stefon Diggs. That would have been cool. But now here we are, few weeks away, and it's quiet for the Giants, but we're hearing speculation. I'm still thinking that they're leaning towards going up for that quarterback, but again, takes 2 to tango. We'll see exactly how it shapes out. Maybe we'll get a pre-draft trade where the Giants move up sooner rather than later. Who knows? We'll see, and it should be exciting to see how it all shapes out.
Before you go, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subbed up already here on Big Apple Blitz. Follow along Anthony's work on his channel and over at Fireside Giants. My Jets coverage on Matt O'Leary NY and Talking Jets. That'll do it for us on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. and we'll talk to you next time.